We're going to talk about the difference between Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro and which one works best. So all three of these medications are in a class of drugs called GLP 1 second or glucagon-like peptide 1 second. The first two, Ozempic and Wegovy, have been around for about 5 years now, and what we know about them is they work really well. Mounjaro just came out and it looks very promising, so let's compare them. So first off, let's start with the basics. So what is the difference between these drugs? Wegovy and Ozempic are the same drug. They're both semaglutide. It's just that Wegovy has a higher dose than Ozempic. So they're both made by Novo Nordisk. Ozempic is used for type 2 diabetes and Wegovy is used for weight loss. So the only difference is the dose. Mounjaro, on the other hand, is made by a different company, Lilly. And it's Tirzepatide. So how do these drugs work? Well, they work in several ways. First off, they're a little bit different from your typical medication because they're actually a hormone replacement. They replace a hormone our body already makes called GLP-1, hence the name. GLP-1 is released after we eat and it tells us we're full, slows down how fast food goes through our stomach, tells the pancreas to release insulin when our blood sugar goes up, and tells the liver to stop making sugar. All of these effects help with both weight loss and type 2 diabetes. In addition to replacing the hormone, these drugs also stimulate another hormone called CCAK. CCAK is basically another hormone that promotes fullness. So overall, all these hormones working together lead to weight loss and better control of blood sugar. Which one of these drugs is best for weight loss? Well, here's the thing. Ozempic and Wegovy are the same exact drug, so they should produce the same results. In fact, there was a study looking at the effectiveness of Ozempic versus Wegovy head-to-head, and the results were almost identical. The reason why there is a higher dose for Wegovy is because there is more side effects. The higher the dose gets, and nausea is the most common side effect. Some people can tolerate higher doses better than others. So if you're having side effects at 2.4 milligrams once a week, you could switch to the 2.4 milligrams twice a week dosing of Wegovy and potentially have less side effects. But the bottom line is for effectiveness, they should be about the same. Now for Mounjaro, it looks very promising. In fact, in the studies, it did slightly better than Wegovy at the highest doses. However, this was a very short study, only 36 weeks long. And the people who got Mounjaro had to get 4 shots a week, whereas the people who got Wegovy only had to get 1 shot a week. So you have to remember that with Mounjaro, you're getting 4 times the drug compared to Wegovy every week. So the side effects may be much worse with Mounjaro. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you have a really good response to these medications, you might lose weight faster than you would like. This is where a medication like Mounjaro could be useful. If you want to slow down your weight loss a little bit, then you can go ahead and lower the dose. With Semaglutide, the only way to do that is to switch to a lower dose formulation. And if you need to lose even more weight, then you switch to the 2 milligrams dose. There's no in between, so in those situations, I think Tirzepatide aka Mounjaro is going to be more flexible and easier to titrate to your needs. Which one of these medications is best for type 2 diabetes? Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro all work similarly. They'll reduce your A1C anywhere from 0.5 point to over a point. Now the problem with this question is there's so many trials showing all sorts of different results. For example, there was a recent study looking at semaglutide versus placebo in people with type 2 diabetes. They found that semaglutide significantly reduced A1C versus placebo, which makes sense. But then they looked at Tirzepatide versus semaglutide and they found no significant difference between the two. But when they added a third arm looking at semaglutide plus metformin versus Tirzepatide plus metformin, they found that Tirzepatide plus metformin was significantly better than semaglutide plus metformin. What gives? Well, this is because of how these trials are designed. Basically, you have to pick a dose for your drug and stick with it for the entire trial. For example, if I'm testing Wegovy, I can't start out with a low dose and then increase it over time. I have to pick a dose and stick with it. In this particular trial, the dose of semaglutide was 1 milligram once a week and the dose of Tirzepatide was 5 milligrams twice a week, so they weren't exactly comparable. Also, the semaglutide group had an average A1C of 7.9, which is pretty high, while the Tirzepatide group had an average A1C of 6.8, which is not that bad. So basically, if you have worse diabetes, the difference between these two drugs will be smaller. On the flip side, if you have better diabetes, the difference between the two drugs will be larger. So what does this mean for you? Well, it means that for people who have really bad diabetes, like an A1C of over 8, I don't think it matters which one of these drugs you use. You'll get a similar improvement in A1C, however, if you have relatively well-controlled diabetes, like an A1C of 6 or 6.5, then Tirzepatide may be a better option for you because it may provide more benefit than Semaglutide. The last question I get a lot is which one of these drugs costs less. Well, the truth is they all cost about the same. Ozempic and Wegovy are covered by most insurance plans. In fact, Wegovy is covered by Medicare even for people who have no other coverage. So which one of these drugs is best for you? Well, it's hard to say without knowing your individual situation. I think the best approach is to try one of these drugs and see how it works. If it doesn't work or you can't tolerate it, then you can always switch to another one. And the good news is you can switch between these drugs relatively quickly. For example, if you're on once a week Ozempic and want to switch to Wegovy, you just wait until the next week and then start your first dose of Wegovy the following week. No need to taper off the Ozempic or anything like that. Just stop the Ozempic and start the Wegovy. The same goes for switching from Wegovy to Mounjaro. If you're on once a week Wegovy, you can just stop the Wegovy and start your first dose of Mounjaro the next day. Now, if you're interested in starting one of these medications, I created a checklist that'll tell you everything you need to do before starting one of these medications. Things like checking your thyroid function, checking your kidney function, and more. You can download the checklist for free. You'll find a link in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and check out my other videos on Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro. Thanks for watching.